For every human identity you govern, a dozen non-human identities just came online. Are they all compliant? This is the new reality. An explosion of non-human identities, from machine identities to AI agents, is expanding your attack surface and creating a massive compliance blind spot. Traditional governance can't see them, let alone control them. It wasn't built for this. SailPoint's Adaptive Identity Security was. It's not just another tool. It's a living layer of intelligence that gives you unified visibility across your entire identity landscape, human and non-human. Their AI-powered platform understands who and what is requesting access, why it's needed, and can immediately detect risky behavior. It adapts in real time, granting access only when it aligns with policy, and revoking it the instant a compliance gap appears, automatically. Stop chasing phantom risks. Turn compliance from a defensive chore into your strategic edge. Simplify audits, reduce risk, and ensure your business is secure and compliant no matter what comes next. To learn more, visit SailPoint.com/compliance.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the ISACA podcast. I'm Donnie Carpenter, Principal for Information Security and Professional Practices here at ISACA. And today I'm joined by Matt Fengman, Field CTO at SailPoint. Matt and I are going to discuss with you how to be audit ready by design. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks for having me.
So just kind of setting the table here, there's been a lot of things recently change in information security, particularly around AI and the new models that came out and the concerns about vulnerabilities and everything. How has the field of identity security changed because of those things, especially when it comes to things like strict compliance rules?
It is ever elusive moving target, my friend. It is constantly staying up on all the latest new frameworks, not only the foundation models for AI, but also the new underlying infrastructure components, everything from agent to agent protocol, model context protocol, all the new agent technologies that running on the client, NemoClaw, OpenClaw, Mosaic, it is constant and ever evolving. And so for us as SailPoint, we really try and take a comprehensive look from a governance perspective. How do we apply policy and enforcement points to make things that are unknown, to discover them, to categorize them, and then, of course, to then build a governance model that allows a consistent way to do enforcement. That is the biggest challenge that we see. One of them that I see more and more frequently being brought up by CIOs and CISOs is really the discovery of these new unsanctioned agents operating inside of companies like NemoClaw and OpenClaw, and they're trying to get their hands around, like, what do we do with them? Because they're incredibly powerful. They can do a lot. But, how do I really restrict how and where they operate? What do we want them allow them to do? What we don't want allow them to do? What's an absolute red line cannot, do outside of the organization? So those policies, the discovery, all of that is probably the just staying up on the latest and greatest. And then also innovating at the pace that the industry is right now, because two of the things that I mentioned to you, model context protocol and agent protocol, didn't exist as technologies 18 months ago. And we've already got fully rolled out and adopted. And now here comes new things like skills from Anthropic. And I think, we're just having to build and make sure that all of our products stay up to provide governance across all that. So it's really a race to match the pace of the industry.
Yeah, matching the pace of the industry. And you mentioned the protocols that have kind of grown up recently that weren't here before and everything, and the different aspects of artificial intelligence from different viewpoints. Can you tell me a little bit about the exact role artificial intelligence plays in helping a business prepare for a security audit?
There's a couple of things that I would say. One is kind of a constant drumbeat for us, which is discoverability, you really can't begin to have a policy to do any sort of governance, any sort of reporting back inside the organization unless you really can do discovery and inventory of what that asset is. I don't care what type of agent it is. I don't care what type of application it is. You have to have this discovery capability. And then you have to start thinking about the role of that technology with the human interactions. Do I want to allow these individual users based on these roles to get access to that? And I don't care if it's an agent. I don't care if it's, an app that is running on your desktop. I have to then have that policy to be able to lock that down. One of the things that we use in AI inside of our own infrastructure is, we do outliers so that way we ensure that, someone's permissions, effective permissions. We look at, other people in the organization that are in similar roles or similar job titles, and we can tell, hey, they've got greater permission, or they have access to more entitlement details than others. And we use AI to build that model to look at those outliers and then help us run that audit certification, as well as go through a review. Because the challenge, the benefit is I'm able to quickly get through an audit and certification. It really helps us accelerate it. The bigger part of it, though, is I want to be able to do it with precision, because my concern as a cybersecurity provider out in the industry is I don't want people rubber stamping and just saying, yep, that looks good enough. I simply want to go through. I want to make whatever information I share back to the administration team. I don't care if it's a manager delegated out in the org or me as the identity owner. Like, I need to make sure whatever I'm surfacing back to them is relevant, it's contextual, and it avoids that rubber stamping, because we've all had applications that, the notifications just become too much and I start silencing them and I start ignoring it, right? We want to fight that. We want to strike that right balance between the ability to surface the right details that is the right actionable infrastructure for those people to do that without being annoying and in their face. So it's that fine balance between how we implement it internally as well as how we surface it back to the end users.
Yeah, it's one of the things from my financial industry days that I always got frustrated with when we were talking about audits was all the manual tasks that the team had to put together and work through to get ready for these, audit evidence documents and materials. And so kind of looking at the AI-driven automation change to that workload, what do you see as the overall improvement in security there?
It's wonderful because we see role simplification. We're seeing way more and way faster retirement of entitlements. So if someone does leave a role and goes into another area of the business, I then can immediately say, oh, your role changed, and I'll remove that access in behind it. And just little simple processes, we internally call it joiner, mover, leaver. It's standard process for us in the IGA land, but it's super interesting because AI really facilitates that. And it allows us not only to automate that process, but it really restricts it. So from a liability perspective, especially on the compliance teams, they're just, a huge sigh of relief, because then they go, oh, I know when these people move that we are going to run through that. And then I don't have to worry about recertifying their access and going through all that, because we understand that that's a lift, and we want to be able to reduce that lift. And by automating those processes and behind it and having the evidentiary trail for them to be able to say, yep, this is when they changed, this is how we removed their access. It just gives everyone a peace of mind, but it also improves the security posture of an organization.
Yeah, good points, Matt. Kind of going into your field CTO work and advising different companies and organizations, what are the biggest hurdles you see when companies are faced with trying to view their user access and digital identities in one central location?
It's interesting because as I work with across many customers, across many industries, and across multiple geographies, I generally look at some of the folks that are really, really doing it well. You mentioned it previously. Financial services, they get my gold star, right? They get the people that have already thought about the roles that they need to have. They have their identities generally in a thoughtful position. I'm not saying it's completely cleaned up, but they're much better off. They started onboarding their applications so that way they can start identifying the roles that need access to them, as well as the individual permissions associated with it. Those folks have by far have had the best. And what it allows them to do is to take advantage of like new technologies, like here comes, AI agents and machine accounts, non-human accounts that are coming into the environment. And the customers that have their identity infrastructure in place have had an easier time of it. I'll be very candid with you. I find that when AI agents started coming in, my more mature customers really were just able to adapt with it very quickly. They saw it as a new identity type. And then they started thinking about, okay, where do we need to start restricting permission? But the one additional challenge that I would say that just because they have their identity right, that means I can get my users to align to the agent and I can start controlling effectively those permissions. But then here's where it starts to get even, a little more challenging, I think, for all of us, is then having the ability to govern how the agents operate and what applications the agents have access. And I will tell you, that's the first time where I've really seen the need in my 30 years in the industry. I look up and go, okay, we need to bring the cloud operations teams together because normally agents are being built by cloud scale providers. The second is I need to bring in my security team to not only just map the identities to it, but I also need to make sure my security operations team, because these agents when they start doing dumb things, they do dumb things very, very quickly. And so I need to make sure that my security operations team that's in behind it. And then I need to bring the AI team in. And I was, prior to coming to SailPoint, I was an agent builder. I was a coder working on generative AI, building out AI agents on site with customers. And as we started doing these deployments, I will be very candid with you. I was worried about what the agent had access to, what systems and tools and frameworks and other agents that I could start getting these agents to work together. But what's really happened is I see the need now more than ever for that whole continuum. Who's using the agent builder, the cloud operations team, the security team, and the agent builder operations team, all of them to work together. So if you don't have security policies in place, I did have to talk about credential rotations in these agents. That's the thing that I think that is the next mile that I'm seeing us really focus on, making sure that we're being that glue as SailPoint inside of those organizations to help bridge those conversations. And that's really where I see the next frontier of getting the agents to behave based on their permissions.
Great points. And you mentioned the agents kind of could do some things that they're not supposed to. And recent news has shown it can actually, delete your database, I guess, if you're in some cases out there. So big concerning things, that have big organizational impacts. Shifting a little bit into some of the things that are kind of just stagnant out there in your environments and talking about orphaned accounts and access outliers that, have been around for a little while and, maybe you don't even have visibility or discovery of those. How do the modern tools spot those items and issues and work to address those?
Yeah, it's funny because I was working with a customer. I was on a big road trip through Southeast Asia. And I started asking them some of these really pointed questions as they were very worried about some of the agents. I'm like, but let's talk about all these service principals and service accounts that you've got out here. He was like, we track them on a spreadsheet. And I'm like, hey, I'm glad that you're writing it down. So kudos. But how are you managing those? How are you life cycling that? Are you rotating those credentials? How many are abandoned? Do we know that? And that's where I think really, some of the newer technologies around non-human identities, that we see that allow us to do machine, discovery as well as machine categorization, because the other part is it's an ongoing battle as new non-human technologies show up. I don't care if they're agents, RPAs, new workflows. We're seeing this as an ongoing drumbeat that you really have to have a life cycle for this across the organization. You have to start then having a life cycle for all of the service principals and service accounts. And I will also share, I think it's going to be interesting to see the days of long-standing existing permissions for some of these service principals. I think their days are numbered just due to the fact of what's happening with AI agents and some of the new infrastructure that's coming in place. If you still have an old service account that has big, broad permissions, it's still sitting there, might be inactive, but it's still in the infrastructure. Somebody potentially has an exploit there. That agent could discover that and take advantage of it. We see it, quite frequently in some of the items that have made the news. I hear about it from customers from time to time, but it really has to be this continuum. It really has to be thoughtful about, the users, the machine accounts, and the agents, and how do you lock them down together? And I think that's where it has to be a team sport.
Great points. What if a business wanted to update their compliance process today? What first steps would you give them in bringing in artificial intelligence?
The number one thing I would do is to start centralizing really their identity stores. I still see too many customers today. Their human identities are kind of in a mix. Some start off birthright in their human capital management environment, and they use those to potentially populate an identity provider, an Okta, Ping, Entra, whatever it might be for their identity store. But you'll still find little lakes of infrastructure. Like I have an IDP that's sitting over here that's doing this, and something that's running on-prem or in other areas. If they did one thing just to centralize that, because hackers aren't hacking, they're really not getting access to infrastructure. They're logging in. They're logging in that are poorly managed credentials or something that hasn't gone through a life cycle. And before they get into that, if you centralize that identity store and start building your policy and enforcement, and then start building some of the culture around delegated administration and reviews, so that way it's not just on the identity team, that really becomes much more of a team sport. That becomes a great foundation. So that way, when agents do come in or how they're going to be managed, and who has access to them, that becomes really important, because I now have a centralized way to control the identities for all of my humans. And then I can augment as I want to with policy and other things for anything non-human.
Yeah, nice points, Matt. You kind of putting your long-term forecast hat on here and looking forward into the future with artificial intelligence and the rapid discoveries we're doing in that space. How do you see the relationship between artificial intelligence and regulatory compliance shifting and aligning over the next few years?
Yeah, I see us today really accelerating the ongoing, and it won't be a snapshot in time certification that will then hand off to the compliance and security, the SOX team. But I see this really being an ongoing certification process that we are all going to have to keep up with. And the reason why is I just witnessed my very first customer that officially went what I call 10 to 1. There are 10 agents for every human identity that they have in their organization. And by the way, this isn't a small organization. This is an organization of 25,000 people. They just passed 250,000 agents running across the organization. And they're doing everything from supply chain. They're doing some field operations. They're using, cost accounting, inbound accounts receivable, outbound accounts payable. It is amazing to see what they've been doing with these AI agents. And it's really becoming a force multiplier. It's a mandate from their board and from the CEO of the organization. But what became super important for them was why they were able to pass that threshold is they had governance and policy controls already in place. They knew what agents they were coming in. They had an ongoing aggregation. So as a net new agent, their primary agent building platform was Amazon Web Services and Bedrock Core. So they had a way for, as a net new agent would show up in Bedrock Core, SailPoint could simply aggregate and understand when that agent created. I then could immediately assign it an owner. I'd then assign it an enterprise identity, and then I could go through my normal process of granted access into applications and data inside of my organization. And once that really got established, we created a blueprint for that customer. So that way they had a way to, if people left the organization or I needed to life cycle that agent, if it wasn't behaving properly, you have to have a way to inform the owner of who that owns that agent that we're going to send that back through a review because it's not behaving as we want it to. If you don't have those governance and controls and the certification behind it, because I then have to certify all those users, all those agents, and all the entitlement details. When you start running at that scale with that many variables, it really could become a challenge. That's why I think this is going to speed up and accelerate. It's not going to be a monthly thing. I think it's just going to be an ongoing snapshot at a given point in time.
Yeah, good points, Matt. kind of looking at third-party risk management associated with all the AI things and connections and agents out there running and connecting to internal and external things. How do you see that piece coming together from the identity security side?
I love telling this story because it just happened. We were in Asia, and won't name the customer, but one of my favorite things that I found out that they had built an agent to go do was they had a mandate and the mission from one of their financial leaders in the organization to make as much money for the company as possible. Well, one of these agents, because it wasn't illegal, I want to be really clear, this wasn't illegal. They started selling on a third-party marketplace the employee's personal information.
No.
So, right, we have ethics and code of conduct, and we all understand and operate via social construct. But I've literally seen agents come up with things like that because it's not illegal, and it's, they thought it was a legit way to go after it. And one of the things that I see right now is there are two additional layers that are coming in here. One is geopolitical. Right. So, yeah, it's fine that it's not legal in my country to go sell that information. Bad idea, poor judgment, but, not illegal. But there are areas like you go into Germany with Black Forest and you go see things that are even in the US right now. There are some new AI legislations that's coming in. Geopolitical and data sovereignty immediately become a part of this process. And so we're then going to have to honor and have policies that allow us to do enforcement on those agents. Not just specific to how and where the agent operates, but then how and where do I store the data that those agents use, right? Systems, tools, application. And I also then have to be able to report on them back to, any governing body that, yes, these agents are here. They operate in my operating domain this way. But then you have to have a geofence capability, right? To say, hey, could say that this only operates in Indonesia, or this operates only in Germany, or whatever we're going to define the operating boundary is. You then have to be able to show back to those organizations that you're honoring that their AI rights and the policies that of data enforcement and data sovereignty for each one of those. So this is where I think to get all these sliders right inside of your organization. It's a really tricky balance right now.
Yeah, definitely a lot to consider, especially when it comes to the data, where it resides and how it's being used, and then the concern about the AI agents and the access that they have may or may not be ethical or legal in those different areas. We've covered a lot of different questions, a lot of different things over the last 20 minutes or so. I wanted to see, Matt, is there something that you have on your mind that you're really passionate about that I didn't really cover in the questions today?
The one of them that I would say that is, I think is really becoming super top of mind is what we're calling shadow AI. We've all heard about shadow IT, but I would say the one thing that I am now consistently getting very focused conversations around specific, how do I start getting control over shadow AI? There's been enough stories in the news and the very famous Samsung leak where, one of their employees took an early version of a spec and ran it through ChatGPT in a public model, and it got retrained into the model, and it created a whole series of kind of challenges to basically unwind all of that. And so what we've done is SailPoint, we made this announcement a few weeks back at RSA, is we've announced some new technology called shadow AI remediation. So we have the ability to do discovery for all of your employees in the organization. And it's really interesting because I get to see who's using the AI technology and who's not. But then I also then can have the ability to say, hey, I want to be able to route these people back to an approved tool and not just shut it down. Because all it's going to do is, you and I both know, if soon as I say you're blocked on your corporate laptop, they're immediately going to grab their phone and they're going to go take it on their personal device. And that just creates another issue. So rather than doing that, we've introduced the ability to have a policy decision point to say, hey, let's redirect you to the approved tool that you've got in your organization. But then what I want to do is I want to block. So that way that, policy upload, if someone does try and upload something into a non-approved tool that's not sanctioned in our front door process, I really want to make sure that's locked down. So I really want to avoid that leakage. And this is honestly has been one of those conversations because immediately following RSA, here comes NemoClaw, here comes Mosaic, here comes, mythos, right? Here comes all of these new things that we then have to start building scale and discoverability and enforcement on. And I just tell it, it's a really broad mesh that's out there. SailPoint does have an offering in this space. And we just love to make sure that we have the ability to talk to you about it.
Yeah, it's exciting news, Matt, and definitely an area that's going to continue to grow as we talk a little bit about, the advances in AI technology, and then the rapid pace that it continues to grow in discovery. Really appreciate that, and thanks for coming on the podcast today for ISACA. Thanks to our listeners who joined in today, and as always, you can find more on this topic and others at the ISACA website. Thanks, everyone.